Good morning. It is the second week of July. Not too far from Nam, aka Melbourne. It's been kind of a weird year for mushrooms. I haven't made another video since my one in far north Queensland, and things are kind of finishing up. It's mostly little small mushrooms now, which are not really my area of expertise, and there's not much really to forage, so it probably won't be much of a foraging video, but just thought let's take a look around and see what we can find and talk about some Australian native mushrooms, because there are not many videos out there about some of the native mushrooms to this vast continent. Been a weird year for mushrooms around Nam. Really was like April and May went hard and fast, and then cut off quick once we got into June. Whereas last year, like this year, it started late, ended early. Last year we started around mid-March and went like well into June. Early July was still okay, but since June there hasn't been much around, but there's still a few little things. Conditions have been good all autumn and winter. It's been cold and wet, pretty mild for winter down here, usually between 6 and 15 degrees Celsius, so that's pretty mild for a temperate Mediterranean winter, but still good enough for mushrooms. But mushrooms do what they want, and they're kind of confusing. So anyway, I'll stop talking and let's go look at some stuff, whatever's around. So a good opportunity here to talk about the differences between Lepista nuda and Cortinarius archeri, which we have here. Fortunately, I have a little Lepista nuda which I just picked earlier, and we'll put them together so you can really see the difference. Wow, beautiful. So, on the right here, we've got Cortinarius archeri, and then here we have a Lepista or Clelandii nuda. Pretty obvious differences. Unfortunately, I do not have the base of Lepista nuda, because the base is often a really good, has a good identification feature in that it has this really fuzzy, vibrantly coloured kind of mycelial mat at the base. But more obvious features we have here is that Lepista nuda is not annulate, so it doesn't have this annulus or cortina that Cortinarius archeri has. Cortinarius archeri has this fairly glutinous cortina here. It's not so much like some of the other Cortinarius, which are more like this spiderwebby cortina. This is very glutinous, and you can see all these rusty brown spores on the cortina here. That is the most obvious difference. They also have different smells. Lepista nuda tends to smell a bit perfumey, but sometimes it just smells like a mushroom. You can also see they have a different way the lamellae connect here. So the gills, if you can see on Cortinarius archeri, have a notched connection. So there's kind of like this divot, and they kind of go up like that, and then they connect onto the stem. You can really see that they are notched. And Lepista nuda, they just kind of connect like that. It's a fairly subtle difference compared to the obvious rusty brown spores and the annulus. Cortinarius archeri also tends to be fairly viscid and sticky on the top, but it's this one's dried out, so it doesn't have that. If you look online, it'll say Cortinarius archeri is toxic. It's a bit over the top. Lots of people have actually eaten this mushroom, confusing it for Lepista nuda. No one's ever gotten sick. They say that because Cortinarius is a huge genus, just like Amanita. And just like Amanita, there are deadly species in it, and there are also edible species. However, there are not many deadly Cortinarius. The deadly ones are kind of scary in that they have this toxin called aurelinine, which can take up to 20 days for symptoms to appear, so it can be hard to trace back the poisoning to the mushroom, and it can cause acute renal failure and kill you. So that's what makes Cortinarius particularly scary, but those are in a section of Cortinarius called Cortinarius section Aurelini, something like that. And they're all kind of reddy brown. They look fairly obvious. They're very different. Cortinarius is the biggest genus of mushrooms in the world. Most of them are actually not toxic. Some of them are good edibles. A lot of people have eaten this and it's been fine. I'm not recommending the average person to go eat these at the moment, because there are also a lot of violet purple Cortinarius which have more subtle differences than these two, and they have unknown edibility. However, no purple or violet Cortinarius in the whole world are known to be toxic, so it's unlikely that you'll get poisoned by eating these, but it's still important to be 100% on what you are eating, and you should be able to tell the difference between these two different mushrooms. Another important thing is that Cortinarius is ectomycorrhizal, so the actual fungal organism is with the roots of trees, usually eucalyptus, like this. So you'll find it only in native forests with native trees. Good to keep in mind that, you know, roots of trees can spread far, and sometimes the tree may be 10 or 15 meters away. So you can be in a mixed pine plantation and Cortinarius archeri can come up if there are some eucalyptus around. But yeah, fairly obvious differences here. Cool. So here we have a oldish Lepista or Clavulinopsis nuda. Could still be kind of edible. You can see it's quite brown on the top. Just got to preface this video for any further things I say. I am slightly colorblind, but I can see it's brown on top. And Lepista nuda is typified by having extremely fluffy base, which is usually extremely colorful. When they're young, they are very vibrant mushroom. This one's kind of not looking so flash anymore. I can feel by the texture in the stem that it is like waterlogged and potentially buggy. A lot of guttation or water droplets on the lamellae here. There are some even older ones here. Yummy, yummy. Wow. Yeah, fairly common edible mushroom. Saprotrophic. It eats the actual organism eats organic matter. It's not too fussy. You'll find it in urban areas in mulch. You'll find it in pine forests, eating like the coniferous needles, and you'll find it in native bushland, like here we are here with a lot of leptospermum. Yeah, this one's too old to eat. Really good year for these. I eat them. I don't think they're a particularly great eating mushroom. They look beautiful. Some people disagree. Some people think they taste excellent. And they can be confused with certain Cortinarius species, which you can't really tell here, but the Cortinarius always have notched lamellae, so you can see these gills kind of just come up. With a Cortinarius, there'll be like a kind of a divot before it gets to the gills and before it gets to the stipe, and the gills will kind of run up the divot and connect onto the stipe, and they will have a rusty brown spore print, which will you'll see like rusty fibrils of this cortina that Cortinarius have, which is kind of like this spiderwebby stuff. And sometimes it's more obvious and less, but all the kind of purple violet Cortinarius lookalikes are highly unlikely to be toxic, and plenty of people have eaten them, mistaking them for Lepista nuda. No one's ever gotten sick, so I mean potentially they'd taste even better than Lepista nuda, but Cortinarius is kind of a dangerous genus with some deadly species in it, so it is more advanced eating than Lepista nuda. But anyway, I'll make another video later if I find a fresher one. This one's kind of old and gross. And there's some tiny things right back here which look like Marasmius. Just from looking at them now, this is my finger for scale. Just coming up in the moss. Marasmius tend to have a very thin little stipe, which is usually two-toned in colour. These are a little bit old, it's hard to film. Yeah, this is a Marasmius, kind of widely spaced gills. Cool. Marasmius is a lot more common in the tropics and subtropics of Australia than down here in these temperate regions. But we do have a few species, and they're always nice to see. Another saprotrophic decomposing species. And right next to the Lepista nuda you can see these pretty dense furry mats of mycelium here, which to my knowledge usually happens like the mycelium gets really happy and active and comes to the top and gets fuzzy when it's about to produce mushrooms. But I actually don't know if that's true. But yeah, this is what kind of what a fungal organism looks like, although this is very obvious most of the time. They're like very thin. This is like dense. Yeah. Just outside someone's property on the side of the road, they got some Pinus radiata, and it has got a very old one over there and a dried up saffron milkcap here. This is like a very good beginner's edible mushroom for people here, seeing as pine plantations are common, and so is this mushroom. It's edible, easy to learn how to eat, quite pretty, not particularly flavorful if you ask me. Always has this quite pretty hollow stipe here. This one's quite, it's a bit old, so it's not quite as colourful as they can be when they're fresh. But yeah. Also outside this person's property, they've got some nice yucky slippery jacks, Suillus, which are rather interesting because they're called boletes, but they are one of the only things that look like boletes that are not actually in the Boletaceae family. They've got their own family. Oh, this one's really in the ground. I think it's Suillaceae or something like that, which has some other weird mushrooms like rhizopogon in it and stuff like this. Very slug-eaten. Definitely not seen as a choice mushroom, but some people love it. Generally seen as being better dried, but they're not great specimens to talk about. I'd say this could have been Suillus luteus. Looks like there's some remnants on the edge of the cap of the annulus, and looks like here there are some remnants too. But yeah, Suillus. Pretty cool find here. I'm right on the edge of the track, and I'm kind of like a shy person, so I'm hoping not many people are walking by. But this is a Lactifluus. These are related to Lactarius. What kind of generally quite easily separates them is they have more of a suede texture on the cap and also on the stipe, and the lamellae tend to be much thicker. As you can tell, it's related to Lactarius because it lactates. It's got the gill milk. A lot of Lactifluus are eaten across the world. I have eaten some. So this is normally called, geez, I'm having a mind blank. Lactifluus something. There's two common species, but it seems again it's a huge species group. Which you need to use smell and faint bits of colour, and you also need to taste them to try and get to species. So I think there's actually about 12 of them. They all look very similar. They're all kind of yellowy orange. So yeah, I will just again break it, bruise it to get some of that milk out. And it is totally safe to taste the milk of any Lactarius or Lactifluus, although some of them are incredibly spicy or bitter and they can burn your mouth. But let's have a look. So I'm just tasting it out. And sometimes if you don't get anything of that, you can bite, taste and spit it to see if you get a reaction. And my rule with Lactifluus is that if they are not spicy, then you can eat them. And they taste really good. But you want to know what you're doing. The milk's really obvious. The lack of any heat is obvious. This kind of suede cap, kind of suede textured stipe, very thick thing. Like I'm squeezing it hard, it's not breaking. They are firm. And yeah, let's see what it smells like, because the really good ones smell like fish. It kind of smells a bit like cheese, actually, this one. Cheese and mushroom. But yeah, really cool. Lactifluus clarkae, that's kind of what this is called, but who knows if that's actually what this one I'm holding in my hands is. But happy to find this. Look at that gilk. Yeah. Oh yeah, and up here there is a very sad looking Macrolepiota clelandii. This is rotten as hell. Can be a good edible species, but not when it's in this form. Another thing to separate Lactifluus from Lactarius is that they have a solid stipe here, whereas Lactarius tend to be hollow. Yeah, they don't tend to be gregarious. Normally you just find one or two. Yeah, be warned, because there are some that look exactly like this, but you taste them and they burn your mouth quite severely. You know, it only lasts for like 5 minutes, but it's not pleasant. You want to have some water or some refreshing drink nearby. Yeah. Cool little species here. From the top could be several things. Unfortunately, it's a bit old. If this is what I think it is, when it's fresh it can be quite colourful and yellow. But this is what I would call a Agaricus. Leuco because it looks similar to an Agaricus from the top, but it's leuco as in white, has white gills underneath, usually has a delicate little donut shaped annulus. I'm not too sure if all Agaricus are edible, but some of them are, not usually seen as great eating mushrooms, and they can look very similar to another genus called Lepiota. I've heard some people refer to, I think it was in a meme, lols, them as lol, so you know, Lepiota or Agaricus, it's a lol, haha, something like that. Yeah, I'm not really an expert on differentiating them, but some of the Lepiotas contain amatoxins, the same as a death cap, so not really something to be messing with, although some Agaricus are very obvious, and some Lepiotas are very obvious, but sometimes they're a lol. So, yeah. Some little spottiness happening there in the lamellae. A bit like a Macrolepiota. And you really want to learn to differentiate Macrolepiota from these, and the reason they're called Macrolepiota is because they're macro. They tend to be pretty large. Got another Macrolepiota clelandii in not the best state, not the worst. This is a really common mushroom, can be abundant. Saprotrophic mushroom, so it doesn't require trees to be around. Usually likes fruiting in open areas, loves grass. Common name is slender parasol, white gills. It has an annulus, but as you can see it has fallen off here, so there is no remnants of the annulus or the skirt. They have a hollow stipe. Crack. Kind of see here, little hollow bit here. The stipe normally is like donut shaped and a fairly distinctive cap. Fairly easy to separate from potentially dangerous lookalikes in that it needs to be large. So it's called Macrolepiota because it's, you know, much bigger than what a typical Lepiota or other lookalikes would look like. the lookalikes would look like. Has a white spore print. There's not really any dangerous lookalikes that are as big as this in native bushland, except for Amanitas. If you were a total beginner, potentially you could get them mixed up, but they are quite different. This is really distinctive, this dark patch in the middle and these little fibrils around. Sometimes they have it's kind of like snake-like banding on the stipe, but other times they're just totally smooth. If you're in warmer parts of Australia, you can get these confused with Chlorophyllum molybdites, which is a turf mushroom, which kind of can like invade the edge of forests. And there are other chlorophyllums which you could get this confused with, but yeah, this isn't really the best specimen to talk about differentiating them. Down in the southern states you get Chlorophyllum brunium, which is an urban mushroom. You won't find it in the forest, and it grows in mulch, and it is considerably more stout than this, much shaggier on top, and has a really bulbous base. It will not have a slender little stipe like this, but you will not find it out in native natural areas. Yeah. Another Macrolepiota clelandii here, still not in its greatest form, but a decent sized one. And a little slug just dropped off there, you can see it. If you can get the base, they tend to usually be a bit fuzzy around the base, but can't really see too much here. Yeah. Also has lost its annulus, pretty slug eaten, but it's still fine to eat. And yeah, you can eat all of it, but with the stipe I tend to strip it up, like peel it into little strips, otherwise it's quite fibrous. But really good tasting beginner mushroom to learn, and that's about the size you're wanting on average. Here we have Amanita xanthocephala, very common little Amanita, which you get in native bushland with eucalyptus. Seems to be various colour forms of this. Some have these white vellum, it flopped over, white vellum remnants on the top, and some are more yellow or orange. This is an Amanita in section Amanita, which is the same section as Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric, and sometimes people confuse this for Amanita muscaria when they're in the bush because the colours can be similar. It also has a striate margin like Amanita muscaria. It's not a muscaroid Amanita, so the chemicals within it would be different to Amanita muscaria. Not too sure if anyone's done a chemical analysis on this to see if it contains muscimol or ibotenic acid, but I doubt it. And it's a shame it has broken, because the base is kind of distinctive, very different to Amanita muscaria, and it's also not annulate, so this never has a little skirt or a ring like Amanita muscaria. It looks like this, doesn't have a ring, and the base, this is kind of pathetic to show like this, but usually has this little orange bit around the bottom, which you can kind of try to imagine being there, even though it's broken. Maybe we can find a better one later, but would not be seen as an edible species to my knowledge, although there is an American species of Amanita called, I think, Amanita parsi-volvata, I'll correct that if I'm wrong, which does look similar, which is seen as edible, but I would not be eating these until someone's at least tested them for some of the more severe chemicals that can be in Amanita section Amanita, like ibotenic acid and whatever's in the panthers and the gematoid ones. But yeah, very common, can be very common, and usually very small Amanita species. Some fresher Amanita xanthocephala. Really nice velum on the top, which are the remnants of when it was in the little egg. Striate margin is less distinctive here. Quite a fresh one, and there's another one hiding in here where there's clearly been a fire. Yucky one right there. Try and dig it out so I can show you the base like I was trying to before. It's easy when you have two hands. Here we go. Beautiful. So very distinctively Amanita xanthocephala, not Amanita muscaria, which you do not often find in native bushland. It has been seen to be invasive very rarely with Nothofagus and reportedly with eucalyptus, but I haven't found any good documentation of that. But very distinctive at the base here. And no annulus, different colours to Amanita muscaria. Definitely not a muscaroid, so Amanita muscaria has these kind of bulbous base with these concentric rings at the bottom. There's some American ones that are kind of yellowy at the base. But yeah. Really beautiful Amanita here. I'm going to call it Amanita luteolovelata. I'm just going to take some photos, but I just thought I'd show how nice it is just coming out of the moss. Yeah. So here we have Amanita luteolovelata. This is seen as a species group. So there's a bunch of different ones that are called Amanita luteolovelata. They are typified by what is either a yellow stipe or a yellow annulus. Sometimes they have both, sometimes they only have one, and sometimes they are just really yellow at the base. This one, not so much. This is in Amanita section validae, which tend to just have a bit of a bulbous base, like your typical mushroom. They do not have they're not dramatically bulbous, and they do not have like a saccate vulva or a sock or an egg or anything like that. A lot of these species are consumed across the world. I have eaten this species. One time I ate it, I just fried it up in the pan, and I got some pretty unpleasant gastrointestinal upset. It was a little bit painful, but another time I boiled it and then fried it up, and it was good. Tastes excellent, as most Amanita do, but again, eating Amanitas is only recommended for highly experienced foragers because there are deadly toxic species within this genus. And I really would not be telling many people to go eat this. I just think it's important to be aware that it's not toxic unless you eat it raw. There are I will put it up on the screen because off the top of my head I don't know the exact word for it, but basically section validae is purported to have some chemical that can destroy your blood cells or something like that if you eat it in its raw state, so it needs to be very thoroughly cooked. But this is actually not that far distantly related to Amanita rubescens and some of the rubescent Amanita, although this is not a blushing Amanita at all. But yeah, Amanita luteolovelata, common species with eucalyptus, especially in the seasonally dry eucalyptus forests around Nam. Super beautiful species. You can see when you cut it in half, it kind of has these somewhat little chambers inside. These are not from insect damage, this is just what they have. And yeah, again, do not go eating Amanitas unless you can confidently differentiate section validae, which some of them look very close to those in section phalloideae, which can be deadly toxic. And some of them can also look similar to section Roanokensis, which can be highly poisonous. And this is the only species I've eaten, and really not recommending this unless you really know what you're doing. You can see underneath with luteolovelata, really yellow underside to the annulus. Another important feature, which as I said, it's a species group, so they do not always have, but you really want some yellow there somewhere, and you really want to know what you're doing. Okay, so this is a bit of a surprise. Wasn't expecting to see this. Unfortunately, it's not in the best shape. This looks like Amanita cheelii to me, which is in section Virginitae. It's a little bit roughed up, but let's see if I'm right. Wow, I think I might need the knife. Very important as always to get to the base of an Amanita. And let's see if we can do it without breaking it. Yeah, so kind of hard to see, but there's the remnants of that saccate vulva, kind of like sock, you can kind of see here. This is in really poor condition. But yeah, Amanita cheelii. This isn't good edible mushroom, but highly advanced, and you really have to be able to separate it from Amanitas in section Phylloideae, which are potentially deadly and do occur in native forest. Most common one is Amanita marmorata. Most obvious thing about this is, well, tends to have very striate margins, which are not so obvious here. Amanita section Phylloideae can also get striate margins if they are particularly weathered. By striate margins, I mean these lines, which are not that obvious here. And the deadly ones also have a saccate vulva. Cheelii does not have a ring, but it can fall off, especially if you've got little critters like a slug munching away. Normally I would eat these, but this is in really poor condition, so I'm just going to leave it. Yeah, really also not in good condition to be 100% on this, even though it also has the right kind of silvery grey coloration that cheelii has. Nice fruiting here of Amanita ananiceps. This is an Amanita in section Rowenacensis. Fairly common species. We'll take a look at this one over here as well. There's a few around. This is the one we want to talk about, but you can see there are old ones like this. There used to be one here too, but now it's gone. Gross. Fairly common species of Amanita section Rowenacensis down in the southern states. Some people also call this Amanita farinaceae. Seems like there needs to be a bit more work in separating them, but for me Amanita ananiceps is much less white on top. It's not as flowery and kind of has this more like a, remember I'm colorblind, but I'd call it like a silvery grey, kind of bit of a shiny texture to it, with these pyramidical warts. They both are very flowery, so if you touch this, the flower will just come off, and they usually have this vellum kind of hanging off the side, which is really beautiful. We'll try and dig it up because the base of all Amanitas is very important, and with Amanita section Rowenacensis, they nearly always have a very bulbous base. This one's pretty noticeably bulbous. Sometimes they are even considerably more dramatically bulbous than this. Sometimes they are more like a tapered little root coming down. They tend to be really flowery like this, farinaceous, delicate little annulus on this one, with the vellum hanging off the side. Section Rowenacensis tend to be fairly pungent in their odours. I always try to show this one to people when I do guided walks and go, you got to smell this. And the smell on this species seems to be highly variable, also depending on age and I guess conditions. This one's really fresh, and I would say it smells a bit cheesy, but sometimes these really like smell like what I would call spermatic, like they smell like cum. Sometimes they smell like nothing. Sometimes they smell like a vegetable or something like this, like a cucumber. There are edible and highly toxic species within Amanita section Rowenacensis. So there are some that are eaten globally in this section, and then there are some, such as I think it's Amanita ovoideae, which looks quite different to this. It has like a saccate vulva and some other features which can cause renal failure. I don't think any of them are deadly, but they're not seen as a species to experiment with for food, a section to experiment for food. even though some are definitely eaten in the world. But yeah, very typically flowery, farinaceous, bulbous base, have this velum off the side, silvery, shiny on the top. Yeah, Amanita ananiceps with a very pungent smell, and again, kind of variable in looks and texture, but a beautiful mycorrhizal, and can be very common. Like there can be times where you're just seeing, quite a lot litter the forest floor. An example of how flowery these are, this is what was left after me putting it on the moss. Right where I've seen that Amanita, I noticed this tiny thing coming out of the moss. And where's the other one? Even smaller down here, look at that. And I'm pretty sure this is a Rickenella, but I will fact check that when I get back. Really cute little genus of mushrooms that I think usually just come out of moss. And yeah, it's starting to rain. So yeah, very close by to those ananiceps we have what I would call Farinacea, although potentially this is just a really young Amanita ananiceps. That is still really flowery and white on the top. I'm not too sure. Let's put them next to each other. So yeah, varying morphology of Amanita ananiceps. You can see that hanging velum and that quite cute little annulus, very short on the top. And this mature one has more of a tapered base, whereas these younger ones are more bulbous. And then this is either a young Amanita ananiceps, or it is Amanita farinaceae. It's kind of confusing how to differentiate them, and I'm not an expert, but really beautiful little partial veil there, which I'm trying to break apart to show you the gills, but I can't, it's kind of thick. Also nearby those Amanitas, there is a lone Agaricus. Not super fresh, but not super old. Agaricus, very well known genus. There's Agaricus bisporus, which is the common button mushroom you get at the shops. Agaricus is this, you think it would be simple, but it's actually this highly complicated genus with like thousands of species, and I think there's nearly 30 sections within Agaricus, so it's a kind of crazy section. I'm assuming it's fairly old in terms of evolution. I could be wrong. So pretty slug chewed up here. Agaricus tend to have pinky to brown gills, browner and browner as the spores mature, as they have brown spores, which you will have noticed if you have a button mushroom in the fridge or not in the fridge and gets older and goes really dark brown. Sometimes when they're young they can be extremely pale. Kind of broken annulus. The annulus can say a lot about which section an Agaricus is in. You can see one of the culprits of the damage here, and also especially the partial veil. When they're quite young, the form of the partial veil, which covers the gills when it's still a button, that can be really important for identifying Agaricus, as well as smell. Within the 30 or so sections of Agaricus, there's only 2 that are known to be toxic. To my knowledge, section xanthodermatae and section hundensis. They're it takes a while, but once you know what they look like, they're fairly easy to learn. If I see one today, I will talk about it. And smell is also very important for Agaricus. Just for this genus, you want to smell if they have a nice mushroomy smell, or if they are almondy or like aniseed, that's a good sign. If they smell like chemicals, that's bad. Also, if they stain a highlighter yellow, that is also bad. But the highlighter yellow for the toxic ones will turn to brown within about 30 to 60 minutes. and there are also edible ones that go gold, which makes it more confusing, but the gold will persist and become more and more intense. It smells like a mushroom. Smells like, well, you know, the mushroom smell is kind of associated with Agaricus, so it smells like an Agaricus. Mushrooms have many different smells. But yeah, I'd call this edible. It's kind of eaten up. But yeah, also remember that if it's dried out or if it's old and wet, that you may not be able to get those stainings or those smells, and sometimes the toxic ones just don't bruise or smell. And also, like, it seems only 50% of the population can actually smell this kind of wheelie bin smell that the toxic ones have. And a tiny little guy here. And yeah, maybe Mycena. Nice sized Agaricus here. Not in perfect condition, but let's take a look. You can see the annulus there. It is quite large. I have to dig in there. Whoa, that's nice. So yeah, this is kind of, the annulus has got me a little bit suspicious here. What's the cap like? So what we want to do with Agaricus is we want to test it for staining. Base can be good for that. Make sure it doesn't stain bright yellow, and you normally want to get the dirt off. It's hard to do it single-handedly, just so you don't smell dirt, and then you want to smell it. Wow. And make sure it doesn't smell like a wheelie bin cleaner. With Agaricus, you have to make sure they're fresh, because if they're really wet or if they're quite dry, the important smells may not be noticeable. They may not be there anymore, and same with the staining. So I'm a bit colorblind, but it looks like there's some kind of staining there. Yeah, a little bit yellowy, golden. So I wouldn't be surprised if this gets more and more golden later, and that is what you want for Agaricus. You either want no staining, or you want potentially red staining, although there is one toxic red stainer. And if it starts to stain a little bit like this, you want to wait for it to go more and more gold, especially if you're not familiar with the genus. Really still quite pale gills, even at this mature stage, which makes me think it could be Sectionavensis. Beautiful cap, something close to subrufrescens, or however you say it. It definitely smells like marzipan and aniseed. A bit bugged up, but yeah. Agaricus is an important one to know, as it is actually a bit complex, frustratingly complex, and you're really not usually going to get them down to species level. But yeah, worst can happen is, you know, quite severe gastric upset if you get section xanthodermatae or section hondensis, like diarrhea and vomiting. But most of the time you're going to have a good time. You really have to be careful with these marzipan ones, because sometimes they are incredibly overpowering, and like you put it in a pasta and all your taste is marzipan, so sometimes just best on their own, but sometimes beautiful. Here we have some very minute hedgehog mushrooms, Hydnum. We don't really have a species for this. Some people call it Hydnum repandum, or there's a darker one which some people call Hydnum crocodens or something like that. They're generally pretty small. This is how you tend to find them. They are distinctive in that they have these spines underneath the cap. They are a good edible mushroom. However, you have to be fortunate to find them in any to find them being gregarious, in that you don't often find many, and that when you do, they're often pretty small, like this size. Although you can get ones that are maybe like palm size, rarely, or like half the size of your palm. And there are times when you can find a lot, but often it is like little bits like this, where you're just seeing them very small. They're mycorrhizal, ectomycorrhizal, so they would be with the eucalyptus around here. Fairly common species in the cooler months. I'm just trying to see, this is often how they are, and then you have to brush away the leaf litter to find more often. They can be very well hidden. They are related to chanterelles, so some people say that chanterelles are in the same family, Hydnaceae, and then to my knowledge the more current thinking is that chanterelles are in their own family, Canthorelaceae, but they're both in the same order, Canthorales, whatever. Yes, but very small. Oh, that's not even a hedgehog. What is this? Tiny Cortinarius? Or is it a... what is this? This is a clelandii. That's why it's important to look underneath when you're picking every mushroom. Maybe it could be a Cortinarius. Look at the colour of that cap. Yeah, Mr. Detective here. Is it rusty brown? I don't know, I'm a bit colourblind. Yeah, I think this is a Cortinarius. What am I talking about? Clelandii. So this is a Clavulinopsis, a fairly common ectomycorrhizal species of coral-like fungi, closely related to another genus called Kgaria, and also Ramariopsis. Clavulinopsis are not seen as toxic mushrooms. I have eaten these. These are more yellowy ones. I think would be called kind of tentatively, however you say it, called Clavulinopsis amoena, but I'm not sure if that species name is really correct. They are kind of hard to get to species just from looking at them, and quite often you have to do certain tests. Like I've seen Alan Rockefeller use KOH, which is like a certain chemical. You drop it on to see if it has like a staining reaction, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things potentially you could do to help narrow it down. But basically the whole genus is safe. You just have to learn how to differentiate it from other corals. I've heard of people getting sick from eating some Ramariopsis, which do look quite different. These tend to be singular little noodles. Beautiful. Whereas Ramariopsis are kind of like this clustered little pointy things, and they're quite slender, look a bit more similar to a Ramaria, which are totally unrelated. So just like there are a lot of stem and cap mushrooms which are not related in that they are in different families of mushrooms, which is the what you get before the genus, there are a lot of different mushrooms that have evolved these coral-like forms which are not related, like Clavulinopsis and Kgaria, and then you've got Clavulina, which are more closely related to chanterelles, and then you've got Ramaria and Phaeoclavulina, which are in Gomphaceae, all very distantly related. But yeah, Clavulinopsis, edible but not really worth picking. I've got another coral-like fungi here. I think this is considered a Ramaria. Not very typical for what I consider to be Ramaria. I forget what it's called, Ramaria pyrospora or something like that. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. To me this could kind of looks a little bit like a Phaeoclavulina too, which are both in Gomphaceae. Yeah, I'll look up which one this is, but beautiful little, very pale. Normally Ramaria are quite thick and fleshy, and they're usually not quite as forked as this, but the branching tips of all the coral-like mushrooms are very important for identification. And yeah, they still sporulate, so the spores kind of come off the edge of all these like little castles here. It's important to note the substrate. because there's kind of like a vague lookalike called artemisices, which are probably all edible. I've never eaten any ones in Australia. Very peppery raw, but those fruit off wood, and they're called crown tip corals because they're kind of like, look like little castles on the top, or crowns, whereas these are quite forked. Ramaria identification is quite difficult, but I will look up which one this is. Some Ramaria are edible. I've eaten a few, but I'm not really going to talk about that here because this is not a good example. And eating coral mushrooms is kind of a more advanced thing, and yeah, but for the majority of them, what's going to happen is you're going to poop your pants and get a bit gastrically upset. Yeah. More Clavulinopsis here, and just found this. Someone had already picked it, potentially even a wallaby. Not in very good form. This is a Fistulinella. I think it'd be like Fistulinella mollis. Cute little bolete, also called the marshmallow bolete because it's a bit like a marshmallow. Yeah, don't know about the edibility of these. Doubt them to be toxic, but reasonably common little bolete you get in these kinds of forests. Unfortunately in not the best condition, but they get, you know, pretty soggy, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a maggot town in here. Hello. Oh. So what have we got here? This could be multiple things from the top. To me it kind of looks like a Scleroderma, pigskin puffball, which is interesting because that's not what this is. But Scleroderma is in the order Boletalis, so it's actually quite closely related to boletes, which this is. I'm going to guess it's a Tylopilus, something in the Tylopilus balloui complex, which is this large species complex of Tylopilus mushrooms, which all need to be described and separated into their own separate species. If you look up Tylopilus balloui on the internet, it doesn't really look like this, but there's a whole bunch of different species within the species complex, which are all just currently called Tylopilus balloui. Anyway, it's a bit of a mess, but let's have a look if I am right. Let me pull it up. Yep. There we go. So fairly young. They have pinky paws underneath, fairly robust. They are slightly bitter, but not particularly bitter. I do eat this one, but you have to really make sure you know that you've got a Tylopilus, because there are some similar looking boletes of unknown edibility. It's not really the best one for showing, but tight little pinky paws down there. We can focus. And whoops, I accidentally stopped filming. They do bruise. I'm kind of learning what kind of color they bruise. They're not a blue staining bolete. It's kind of more like a browny dark color from memory. I'm going to do my best to cut this in half one-handed, which may be a little bit sloppy. Let's see how we go. Yeah, pretty sloppy. Yeah, so there is no strong staining initially, but it's always important with all boletes to check for staining. Sometimes it may take up to 10 minutes or longer, and you want to check around the edge of the sponge connection here for staining. You want to check here for staining, you want to check in here, you want to check where it starts from, and you also want to bruise the paws here, and obviously try not to get dirt on it like I'm doing, and just see how they change over time. But yeah, I wouldn't say this is a beginner mushroom to start eating, because it will take you a while to learn what these Tylopilus balloui group look like versus other paler boletes. So yeah, but cool marbling effect inside. So yeah, a bit bitter. I find they go well in a miso soup or something. I probably would not put these with pasta, but they're not horribly bitter. And you can always do a taste and spit test on them. Make sure you spit it out. That's the most important part of a taste and spit test. Just to kind of gather how bitter these will actually be. But they have a great texture, very firm. So this is a native bolete. Currently it has like a, it's been called Tylopilus, I think cyanogranulifer, but to my knowledge it's a temporary name. And Roy Halling, who's American, but is one of the world experts in Boletaceae and has studied a lot of boletes in Australia, suggested these could potentially be a different genus, Perforellus, or maybe it could even be its own genus. It readily succumbs to hypomyces, which is an ascomycete fungus which parasitizes other mushrooms. You can see it here. These are other boletes, and it goes yellow with all these spores. And you can see it's starting to take over this one. It can be really hard to find fresh ones of these. Like sometimes you can walk through a forest and there's about 40 of these, and they're all been taken over by hypomyces. When it's fresh, it has more pinky spores, but they stain quite vividly this very dark purpley black colour. Hello. Yeah, unsure about the edibility of these. Next time I find a fresh one, I'm gonna put it underneath the microscope and look at the spores, and maybe that will tell us if it's a Tylopilus or a Perforellus, or maybe it won't tell us much. But anyway, it can be a very common mushroom. I tend to find it with Eucalyptus camaldulensis, river red gums, but I don't think it's specific to that. But you'll always find it with eucalyptus. Yeah. Pretty old Lycoperdon here, a kind of puffball. See, this one's even older, sad and deflated, nice and puffy. It's not toxic to inhale the spores, but don't consciously shove them down your throat, because I think I heard of some stories of some teenage boys like purposely puffing it all down their mouth, and they did get some respiratory issues. I think it's called lycoperdon, something like that. I may have to fact check that when I get home. You can see a slightly fresher one here, boop, and a quite a bit fresher one here, but still puffy. So these are edible. Whoa, look at it go. These are edible when they are young and totally white inside. Fairly distinctive texture for Lycoperdon. There's a bunch of different other smaller puffball like mushrooms that are related, like a Bovista and Calvatia, and there's some bigger ones. I think it's Mycenastrum. I may have to correct myself if that's something totally else, which potentially it is. And there's also like toxic things like Scleroderma, which kind of erupts like a volcano, which is in Boletalis. And there's also Pisolithus, the horse dung fungus, which is ectomycorrhizal. What's that? Little whatever those mites are called. Beautiful. And Pisolithus are edible, but I don't think they're really worth eating. But yeah, Lycoperdon, when they're fresh, tend to have these little, you could call them hairs or whatever you want, all over them. Puffballs don't tend to have any flavour, but you can use them just like tofu. They're kind of like a mixture of tofu and white bread, their taste, so there's not much flavour, but if you marinate them, they're good to eat. But once they start sporulating, then no good to eat anymore. Some fairly old Geastrums here. Earth stars, look at this guy. like the bud of a eucalyptus fell in it. Should puff, but it's very wet. No puff. Come on. No puffs at all. Yeah, they're a bit too old. But yeah, some cool earth stars here. Be nice to find some fresher ones to talk about. Yeah. Fairly mature Scleroderma here. Pigskin puffball is the common name. They're actually involatiles, so they're related to boletes. And when they are maturing like this, they can look a bit like a bolete from the top. But you'll cut them inside and they usually be like a purpley black colour, which is the undeveloped spores. Spores aren't fully developed yet, not really puffing out yet. But yeah, they kind of open up like a bit of a volcano. Very common genus. I think also quite hard to get to species a lot of the time. And majority of them are toxic, although I have seen them eaten in parts of Southeast Asia. Seems some species are edible, but I definitely would not be eating these, and quite a lot of them are toxic. Kind of curious as what to this is. I think I have an idea. But let's see. Oh, look at that one hiding in there. Wow. Wow, what is this? Looks like it's something in Hygrophoracea, the wax cat family. Really interesting. I'm not too sure. These are cool. So, some very small little things here and here, which I probably will not be able to identify. Rather interesting. Growing from bits of dead grass. That's amazing. I do not know what these are, but I will look them up later. Quite beautiful. That's amazing. Cool. So here we have a Pinus radiata, a common tree that is used in timber plantations, overused, extensively used in southern Australia. It's a tree from California, and it is a little bit invasive in bushland, which most mushroom people don't seem to mind, because it hosts a few edible mushrooms. And you can see there were clearly mushrooms here, a bunch of gills that have been removed. I'm guessing they were Amanita muscaria. Could have been a russula. I think actually they were probably a russula from looking at them. But anyway, someone's picked them. Who knows for what purpose. But yeah. Pinus radiata invasive in this patch of tea tree eucalyptus woodland. Little Entoloma here. Very striate cap with a little divot in it. Fairly common, highly diverse genus. I think they're all seen as saprotrophic. Oh, and I didn't even realize there's some Clavulinopsis right next to it. Cool. Clavulinopsis, to my knowledge, is mycorrhizal coral-like genus. They're all edible, but as you can see, they're not really worth picking most of the time. Anyway, back to the Entoloma. I'm not very good with this genus. It's highly diverse. Wow, look at that. Smell and colour is important for Entoloma. Probably taste is too, if you want to get more advanced. They are not annulate, so they never have an annulus or a ring. I'll smell this one. Mild smell. Couldn't really describe it. Kind of a bit like a cucumber or something. But I'm not so good with this genus. Most entelomas are not seen as for eating, but they are highly photogenic, and a few are reasonably toxic to my knowledge, but most people aren't going to be eating these, although you can confuse them for Lactaria, which are another edible which can look similar. Yeah, common name for enteloma is pink gills because they have a pink spore print, although the lamellae are not always pink. Some little Cortinarius down here. Cortinarius is the biggest genus of macrofungi in the world, and by macrofungi I mean fungi that produce a reproductive structure, also known as a mushroom. They come in all colours of the rainbow. Some are deadly toxic, majority of them are not, and quite a lot of them are edible, but that is highly advanced when we're thinking about eating Cortinarius, and we don't know the edibility of majority of Cortinarius in Australia, so not really a genus to tinker with. Usually have a rusty brown, remnants of a rusty brown spore print, which seems to be missing here. Yeah, not too sure on this species. I mean, from the top you could potentially misidentify it for Psilocybes subaeruginosa, but that has other features to distinguish it, particularly a purple-black spore print, and it's very firm stipe on a magic mushroom, Psilocybes subaeruginosa, whereas these Cortinarius are very brittle, among other things. But yeah. Another species of Cortinarius here. Not too sure what. It's not really my area of particular knowledge for me, this genus. Cortinarius is very hard, but you can see remnants of that rusty brown Cortina there. And the notched gill attachment that all Cortinarius have. Yeah, more rusty here. And there are some smaller ones here of potentially different species of Cortinarius here too, although I'd say it's probably the same. Yeah, this looks like the same species to me. Cool. Another Cortinarius species here. Being colourblind makes identifying Cortinarius a bit difficult for me, but you can see that rusty brown fibrils left of the Cortina here. Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say this is kind of a faded Cortinarius rotundosporus. It does seem to be a little bit like lilac and green, but someone with better colour vision might be like, what? Yeah, another Cortinarius. So unfortunately I went to move a little stick out of the way and then I knocked this over. So it doesn't look quite as nice as it did a moment ago. This is a Discolia. Most people call the Australian ones Discolia recedens, although from my knowledge they are actually quite hard to get to species level. They're typified by a really special annulus, which if I can get in focus, it's kind of like corrugated with these little wrinkles. Really beautiful little thing. I was hoping to take a photo until I knocked it over, but yeah, Discolia, they are ectomycorrhizal. Look at that little annulus, wow. That's the best part about this mushroom. Ooh, it's snapping. Ectomycorrhizal, to my knowledge, with leptospermum, but maybe not specifically. Perhaps you can get them with eucalyptus too. But a lot of leptospermum here. So I'm basically looking at every mushroom I am seeing today as it's pretty sparse. But let's take a look at this, fruiting from this little log. Pluteus, little Pluteus here. If you can get it, free lamellae connection. If you can kind of see up in there, there's like a space before the gills attach. Kind of hard to see. They're not annulate. They never have an annulus. They have a pink spore print. Really cool genus. Some of them are very beautiful. There are some yellow ones and all different kinds of colours. always from wood. You can see how it's just attached there with a bit of mycelium around the base. Pluteus are all seen as edible, generally not seen as a good eating mushroom, but I've never eaten a Pluteus myself. They are kind of usually fairly insubstantial. But yeah, fairly common genus, really nice wood decomposer. There are some species which you can see in the city which grow on mulch too. Yeah. Very interesting here. I'm back near the car park and all these Pluteus have been picked. Look at them, just chopped off. Really don't know what someone was doing here, but anyway, kind of curious. You can see these pinky brown spores of the Pluteus. Yeah, anyway, would have looked quite nice. Something else here, I'm not too sure what it is. Fairly distinctive stipe, kind of fibrillose. We'll take a look. Oh, it's long. Oh, I'm ruining all the evidence. Okay, that was very sloppy. You can see kind of the remnants of a annulus here, if I can film it. Kind of the remnants of a ring down here. Unfortunately, just where I snapped it. So, ooh, interesting. Hey, Kookaburra. Yeah, I don't know what this is, to be honest. Maybe the kookaburras do. Kind of reminds me of a Satharella, but that... I mean, maybe that's not the remnants of a ring, that's just like where the stem is broken. I don't know. Very glabrous, shiny stipe. Don't know this one. Leave it for the springtails. A cute little family here of what I would call Rickenella, but I will correct myself if I have that wrong. I tried to pick it and it's so slimy on the stipe that it's kind of difficult. Tiny little one, yeah. So a rather cool thing here, just walking around this mossy area. There's not much, but I noticed this. And I have seen this on iNaturalist, but the name isn't coming to me. It's like something citrina. Really beautiful coloured polypore. Stunning. I think this is the first time I have consciously seen the species. But yeah, really beautiful. And little thing in this mossy forest of Leptospermum. Yeah, cool mushroom here. Fairly common species. You get in eucalyptus forest. This is Laetoporus portentosus, also known as the white punk. Very white underneath. You can focus. Polypore mushroom in Polyporaceae. It's a weird one as it's actually related to chicken of the woods, which are also in Laetoporus, but this is not seen as an edible mushroom. It's not toxic, it probably just tastes a bit like eating cardboard. This can get extremely large and you'll often find it fallen off on the ground and it kind of looks like this big sponge full of holes. So it lasts for a long time on the tree, then eventually bugs will get through it, maggots eat it out, it'll fall on the ground. And it was used as a source of tinder by First Nations people across a lot of Australia. But yeah, really cool one. And a nice common species that's good to get to know. So very distinctive texture on the top here, kind of quite smooth and soft. And then these tight white pores, can we get that brighter? Underneath. which have already been a bit slug munched. Yeah. So we have here what appears to be the most common, at least commonly recorded, species of mushroom in Australia. Potentially because it's so vibrant. Love these flowers poking through. This is Trametes coccinea, also called Pycnosaurus coccinea, I think, in some old guides. Now it's Trametes, very common. Where we do see some beginners saying, "Is this chicken of the woods?" No, it's not. Very different. Very different texture. Not toxic or anything. Quite beautiful underneath. Very minute pores, as is typical of the genus Trametes, which also has, turkey tail, Trametes versicolor, and a bunch of other stuff. Up in the subtropics, in tropics, you get a different species. I think Trametes persanguinea. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. But down here in the more temperate regions, it is just Trametes coccinea. Beautiful, very common wood decomposing fungus. Was used by First Nations people reportedly just when people had mouth infections and you chew on it. I've attempted to chew on it. It doesn't taste particularly nice, but that's with a lot of medicinal things. Yeah, so you could give it a go if you want. Very common, does not mind fairly arid conditions either in dry forests. This is a mushroom you can often find when there is absolutely nothing else. But because there's been a bit of rain, they're pretty nice and juicy at the moment. Yeah, Trametes coccinea. A fairly common, very colourful leather fungi here. Some people, when they're beginning out, they confuse these with turkey tails or other Trametes. Very distinctive when you look underneath. You'll see why they are called a leather. And that is because they do not have any pores underneath. It's just this smooth, leathery surface. And it feels leathery too. It's very nice to touch. Really nice concentric rings of colour on these. Not edible or toxic. They are just a really nice, important mushroom for breaking down wood, cellulose, lignin, that kind of stuff. Yeah, very widespread across a lot of Australia. It goes up into subtropics, and you'll get it in rainforest, and you get it in woodlands down here, and wetter, temperate rainforest. Very widespread species. So yeah, currently called Styrium versicolor, but I think there is some debate on the actual taxonomy of this at the moment. Yeah. So here we have Trametes versicolor, also known as turkey tail, and a little slug here. This is a well-known mushroom. It's kind of seen as medicinal. It's touted to have, varying properties. There is kind of seems to be some doubtful efficacy, about how medicinal this mushroom actually is. But seeing as I am not particularly well versed on the subject, I won't say more than that. But basically, if you're interested in taking this mushroom as medicine, do your reading up, look at peer-reviewed papers, etc. Look at the actual science. But it's probably not harmful. It's commonly sold in teas and stuff like that. It's not edible. It'd be like chewing on a piece of bark. Fairly easy to identify, and there's a lot of lookalikes. None of them are toxic to my knowledge. It's not a fussy species. You can find it in urban spaces quite often. Obviously, it has variable. It's versatile in its colours on the top. These ones are a bit old and dried out. Not particularly spectacular. It's very bendy. It doesn't snap when you move it. It will just bend right back. And it has these very small little pores underneath, which will help you separate it from lookalikes like Styrium, which are just kind of like this leathery surface underneath. And You can make a tea out of this. I don't, but you certainly could. And yeah, can be a fairly common mushroom. Really not fussy at all. I see it in the city sometimes, but you also see it in rainforest, and it can fruit quite spectacularly on a trunk. But yeah, cool. Some Cortinarius here. Really cool little polyporous mushroom. You get quite velvety and somewhat can be iridescent on the top, usually kind of funnel shaped, and when you look underneath they are stipitate with this really interesting porous surface. Really beautiful little mushrooms, not considered edible or toxic, but yeah, beautiful little things. I think they're quite hard to get to species level, and potentially not many have been even described in Australia, but I could be wrong saying that. Cortinarius is not my specialty, but they are cool. A nice lone urnula here. In some books these are called Plactania. I'm pretty sure they're now called urnula. Not too sure on the species. They can often be quite gregarious on like wood and logs. Really beautiful little forest cup. For those who are really beginning, I guess you could confuse them with wood ears, auricularia, but those don't really seem to occur in Victoria, and they also look quite different to these, which are... This one's like quite stipitate. It's got like a bit of a stipe, comes up in this quite goblet-like form. Little goblet for the lizards. Yeah, cute. Very beautiful reproductive structures of a lichen here. I'm not so good with lichens, but I think this is a Cladonia. A lot of people don't really know what a lichen is, so I'm kind of struggle to know what it is myself. Here's another bit of a lichen. Basically a lichen is a bunch of different organisms living together. Usually one or two different fungi, and then like an alga or a cyanobacteria. But the reproductive structure of a lichen is always fungal, usually an ascomycete fungi, and that's what these are. They are basically a mushroom. Usually they'll just be little cups, but sometimes they can be more obvious, beautiful structures like this. And there are a few basidiomycete fungi, that lichens, that make little normal looking stem and cap mushroom fruiting bodies like Lichen, which maybe we'll see today, maybe we won't. And I've also just spotted some tiny Clavulinas here. They look like they're just starting. Even smaller over here, which is native coral. Very small at the moment. So I think that's about the end for today. If I've been a little bit rambly, I can get a bit spacey, and you want anything clarified, just like comment, and I'll try to clarify things in the video when I edit it, put in some text, because sometimes I say things that doesn't make sense in the moment, or leave out some important gaps of information. Yeah, so I'll try to fix that up. Saw enough stuff today. Wasn't heaps. It may seem like a lot with the editing, but I've been walking for about 7 hours, and I filmed most of the stuff I saw. And like, when it's really good, you can be in the same spot, move 10 meters in an hour. So we're quite far past that time of the year, but still really beautiful to be out and take a look and try and make something, and hopefully it wasn't too confusing. And yeah, thanks.